Well, hello and welcome to the Alpha Transform Tuesday, where we talk about all things Alpha Transform, and today we'll be talking a little bit about Alpha Anywhere as well. My name is Dave McCormick. I'm VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software, and today we're going to be going over a question that was submitted yesterday regarding the use of Alpha Transform with the Alpha Anywhere report writer, and how do you go about doing this? Which is a great question, and I love getting questions early because I can prepare for them. But if you do have any questions, go ahead and type them into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. If you think of your question after the fact, just send me an email at TF, as in transform service, TF service at alphasoftware.com. So let's get started. Okay, so let me just scroll here through my notes. Just a quick question. I want to make sure everyone can see my screen. If someone could just type into the questions box that you can see my screen and you can hear my audio, that would be great. All good. Excellent. Wonderful. Let me just start at the beginning here with the Alpha Transform and Alpha Anywhere report writer. So in today's example, I'm going to be showing you how you can take a form that you've created in TransForm, where you've filled out the data on your mobile device, and get that data into Alpha Anywhere, where it can be used in the Alpha Anywhere report writer. And in this example, we're going to use an invoice, which is a pretty common example because it typically has parent-child relationship, where the order can have, which is the parent, can have multiple items, with each of the items being a child. And so I thought that would be a pretty good example. So to begin, we'll begin here in Alpha Transform Central. And in Alpha Transform Central, I have defined or created an invoice form. Now, I've shown you how to create forms and things in prior episodes, but if not, by all means, go ahead and take a look at the training videos that you'll find at transform.alphasoftware.com, and they'll show you how to build out something like this. But let me show you the form that I've created. I've started with a date time field, which I'm using as my key field. I'll talk about that in a moment. I'm also collecting the customer's name, their address, their city, and their zip code. Then for each order, I can have multiple items. So I've created this group here called items, and the items have a product name, a quantity, and a price. I've also included one last field here for payment type, although I ended up not using it in the example. So once I created this and pushed it up to the Alpha Cloud, I then opened it up on my phone and I started typing in sample data. So I entered in a customer name, and then I started entering in items, quantities, and prices. And when I was all done, I went back to Transform Central and I went into the Management Console to check my work. And sure enough, there was the data that I had entered. I have two records. One is the customer name is me, Dave McCormick, and the other is a fictional customer, Ingrid Andrews. And I gave them addresses, and I put down order stuff. In this case, they ordered a cable and a monitor and a splitter and another cable. And so all the data is here now in the Transform Cloud, and we are ready to start bringing it into, oops, I've jumped ahead, bringing it into the Alpha Anywhere report writer. So to do that, I went and opened up Alpha Anywhere, and I told Alpha Anywhere in the control panel that I wanted to create a new report. And typically, when you create a report, you'll often use a SQL data source. That seemed to be the most popular way in the past to create reports. In other words, just point it to any sort of SQL backend, whether it's MySQL or MariaDB or Oracle or DB2 or anything. But SQL isn't the only option. You can also use a custom data source. And when you choose custom data source, you'll get this additional dialog box over here, in which it asks you how you want the data to be supplied to the report writer and the language to use. Now, right now, Alpha only has one language to use, and that's Xbasic. I suspect that there's this drop down over here is going to also have Node as another option in the near future. But anyway, I'm doing this as Xbasic today. And then what I needed to do was give it a name. This is an internal name just to my report, and I called it getData. I told it that the data format, instead of carriage return line feed format, I'm going to give it back a JSON packet. And then I told it that, and then I defined my getData function name. So getData function name is in fact just pointing to another function. GetData is getInvoiceData, which is a global function that I defined. And I'm going to tell you all about that function because it does require a little bit of coding, but it's not too bad. And I think most people here on the call should be able to work this out. To create the getInvoiceData Xbasic function, I basically created some pseudocode, at least in my head to begin with, in which I said, okay, well, what does this function need to do? Well, the first thing it needs to do is it needs to use the TransForm API and get the data that I want. And then once I have the data, I'm going to need to format that data in a way that the report writer can use it. And then I need to pass that data back to the report writer. So that's all that function needs to do. So the first part, getting the data from the TransForm API, is actually really quite simple. Let me show you what's going on with that. In Alpha Anywhere, when you are on the Web Projects control panel, you can go up to the Tools menu, and you can choose this option here called Open TransForm API Explorer. That opens this interface, which is pretty cool. The TransForm API Explorer knows all about the methods that TransForm has available to it. And those methods, I guess currently there are 39, and they range from adding users to an account to you can actually create forms using the API, create form definitions. You can add data, you can retrieve data. And in this particular one, the one we wanted is called Get Form Data for a layout in which I specify a form ID. So I think it's called Get Form Data Array for Form ID. It's kind of small here, but I'd be happy to send you off this PowerPoint when I'm done. It's option number 21. When I chose that, I had some options here. You know what? Why don't I just show this to you live? Might be a little bit more exciting. Let's go into the Web Projects control panel. I'm going to go to Tools, and I'm going to choose the TransForm API Explorer. Now, I have previously entered my API key here. If you don't know where to get the API key, it's actually really quite simple. If you just go to TransForm Central, and you go into the Home tab, it's just down here, Get API Key. And you'll be given a list of different permissions you can assign your key. I happen to have chosen all in this case, but I believe all you need to do is be able to read form data. So read data is really all you need to do. And when it's done, it'll give you an API key here that you can copy. And then back here in Alpha Anywhere, you'd click Enter API Key. I'll show that to you live. And you can paste in the key. Please don't steal my key. I'm going to change it afterwards. The next thing I needed to do was I needed to enter in the form that I was looking for. And so that is the form ID can be found over here. Let me go back. And here's my invoice form. And there's my form ID. It's simply called Invoice. So let's go back to Alpha. I'm going to type in Invoice. And I'm going to click the test button. And it came back with my data set. Here's me, here's my address, and here are the things that I placed in my order. Here's some other fields that are created by the system, including one called the primary key field, which is one you might be interested in because I think it's a good one to do grouping in a report later on. Again, I'll get to that. There's my other record here, Ingrid Andrews, and here's all the stuff that were bought there, and the metadata with that record as well. So I've gotten back this JSON packet, and you're probably saying to yourself, well, great, that's all I need to do because the report writer can take JSON, but there's something else you do need to do, and I'll show you what you need to do. The JSON that you get back, so basically, I'll get to that in a second. First of all, so I see that I'm getting the JSON back, and it does contain the data that I need. So the question is, how do I write the code, though, to do that? And all I have to do is in Alpha Anywhere, once I've set up the example the way that I want it, pop over to Alpha Anywhere, Tools, TransForm API Explorer, Form ID Invoice, Test. Okay, that's all there. All I need to do is click this Xbasic tab, and it will actually literally give me all of the code that I need. So let me go back to PowerPoint, and I have highlighted that for you. So that's the code. If I run this code, it's going to give me back a variable in something called result that has all of that data in it, all of that JSON data. So all I did was I took that code and I pasted it into my getInvoice function. So here it is up here. Here's that section that I pasted. Now, if I had returned the data at this point, what it would look like is this. It's hierarchical data. So it's basically a set of arrays. There's an array, the top level array is a record for each one of the forms that I've entered. And then within each form that I've entered, there's an array for the items that have been entered. So the top level array are the orders themselves, the invoices, and the lower level array are the items that belong to each one of these invoices. So for example, I ordered a tower PC, a router, and a power supply on this particular invoice. Now the problem is that the report writer does not handle hierarchical data. Instead, it handles only flat data. So the data can't be in this format, in this hierarchical format. Instead, it needs to be flattened down into this flattened format where there's repeating rows for each one of the combined records. So for example, when I ordered 3 things, a tower PC, a router, and a power supply, in the flattened version, you'll see my name repeated here 3 times, one for the router, one for the power supply, and one for the tower PC. And the same is true for the next one. So the question is, how do I get the data from here into there? And to do that, we're going to use a couple of Xbasic functions, which will make your job much easier. And I'm going to go through the ones that we're going to be using right now. The first one we're going to use is called JSON Parse. And what JSON Parse does is it takes a string that has JSON in it, like our hierarchical data string, and it passes it into a dot variable or a pointer variable. If you're unfamiliar with pointer and dot variables, they're really handy things to know. Definitely look them up in the documentation for Alpha Anywhere. But basically, it's a variable that has sub-elements. So, for example, it would be, p dot name, p dot age, p dot whatever, and you can have p dot dot. You can create basically multiple layers of sub-elements in a dot variable. A lot of you are already familiar with this. I'm just going over the basics though here. So once that data is placed into a dot variable, you can then manipulate it, and then you could take that dot variable and turn it back into a JSON string using JSON Generate. So JSON Parse takes a string with JSON in it and turns it into a dot variable. And then JSON Generate takes a dot variable and turns it back into a JSON string. Think of it as 2 sides to the same coin. This one turns it into a dot variable, this one turns it back. And the reason we're going to do that is because we're going to remove some stuff that we don't need from the beginning. I'll show you the stuff we don't need. We don't need this here, this error text, high time. We just want this data here on the inside, and that's why we're going to be manipulating it. So let's begin with that. The first thing we'll do is we will get the data that we got back from the code that Alpha generated for us. And if we look here, we'll see that there is a variable called JSON response, and JSON response contains all of the data. So I'm going to take JSON response and I'm going to parse it into a variable called P. I'm then going to create another pointer variable called PR. And for PR, I'm going to assign it to P, but I'm only going to assign it to the result portion of P. So what I'm left with in this JSON, in this pointer variable PR, is just the stuff I want. So I'm not going to have error this. I'm just going to have the results. So think of that as sort of like a cleanup thing. So I'm getting rid of the stuff I don't need. I'm keeping the stuff I do. Once that's done, I'm going to use JSON Generate, and I'm going to turn it back into a string again, and I'm going to call that string JSON. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take that JSON string and I'm going to flatten it. So while I still have it in hierarchical format, I want to flatten it into this format. So to do that, I'm going to use JSON Flatten. JSON Flatten takes the JSON string that we just had and flattens it into data that we can read in the report writer. But in order to do this, I need to create a template to show the flatten function how I want it to be done. There's documentation on how to do this. I'm going to walk you through it once. Chances are this one time is not going to be enough if this is the first time you've ever seen it. For me, it took about, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes to wrap my head around it, but now once I've gotten it, it's pretty easy. What I had to do was I had to create a string, and in that string, I had to create a JSON template. So I told it, okay, when you find date time as a value, let's go back to the data, there's date time. I want you to include that in my flattened data and give it the name date time. When you find cust name, I want you to include it in the flattened data, but call it customer name. You can actually change the field names like I've done here. When you find cust address, assign it to cust address. Cust city is cust city. Cust zip is, you guessed it, cust zip. But when we get to the items on the inside, I have to tell it, let's take a look here, about this item group. So I said, yeah, I want to include item group as well. And in item group, where you see product name, I want you to find product name. Where you see quantity, I want you to find quantity. Where you see price, I want you to find price. So I've created this JSON template. And then by passing that template along with the string that we had created before, where we had removed the junk out of it, we're able to get a result. And we put that data, we took that result here, and we passed it into getInvoiceData, and our function is now complete. So if you look at what you get as an output, in fact, I can do that for you in real time here in Alpha. Close that. And let me go over to code, and I'm going to find my function here, getInvoiceData. And if I say getInvoiceData, you'll see when it's all done, it returns me this nice flat array. I'm going to stretch that out so you can see all of the data on the inside here. So row 1, everything is repeated for each line item, but you see tower, router, power supply, and my name here is repeated 3 times. Ingrid's name is repeated 4 times, 1 for each of the things that she bought over here. And so now I have that data. Now, once I get that data back and it's passed into the report writer, the report writer now sees all of my fields here in the drag drop list. Date time is here, customer name is here, customer address is here, as well as the product names and quantities. So I use that to create my report. Let's go take a look at that report in real life. Close this guy here. I'm going to go over to reports and design. Okay. And let me scroll down so I can show you. Those are my fields. So all I did was I took the fields out and I dragged them onto the report writer. And I created a group in my report writer because I wanted to list out, let me just preview and show you what it looks like. I wanted to list out each of the line items separately in my report. So I created a group. And what I decided to group on, in this case, was on the date time. Now, that's fine in this case because I know date times are unique. I entered one record, and then when I go and enter in another record, the time has since changed. So I know that I can separate my records that way. If you had multiple people entering it at the same time, there's a chance you could run into some sort of collision. So date time might not be the best way to break on that. Instead, you'd probably want to use the primary key for the form. And that's just one of the, although I didn't put it as part of the JSON set, whoops. It is included in the results that you get back. So let me just pop over here and show you what I'm talking about. Here is the hierarchical data, and one of them is called primary key. So if I had included in my template primary key, I would have gotten it back as part of that data set, and I could have used that in the report when I was doing the grouping. So once that was in, I placed the fields, and then I placed some calculated fields. I was able to, for example, extension, I said was you create by multiplying the price times the quantity. Oops, let me pop over to the real one, see how that's set up. Where do I have calculated fields. All right, it's been a little while since I've used the report writer. Here we go. Now, the data that you get back in JSON format is typically going to be in text format. So when I got back my quantity and my price, I had to use the convert type function in order to turn it into a numeric value before I can multiply that out. So just keep that in mind, that if you're trying to multiply things and you're getting an error, make sure that you're not trying to multiply character fields. Make sure you've converted them first. And the last thing I did was I took that character field and I dragged it down here into the group name, and I told it that I wanted to see a total of that, and the result was a report that looked like that. So I think that's pretty much it for my demo. We started out here with we'll start at the beginning. Started out here by creating a form, filling out that form, making sure that the data was there, and then I created a report. For that report, I used a custom data source in which I used an internal function name called getData. GetData really called another function called InvoiceData. InvoiceData's job was to get the data from the TransForm API, format it so it just is the stuff that we need, and return it back in a flattened format that the report writer can use. To write this function, I used the TransForm API Explorer. It showed me what I needed and what I was going to get back as the result, and I just clicked on the Xbasic tab to get the first part of my script written for me. I pasted that into the function that I defined, and then to flatten the data, I used the functions JSON Parse, JSON Generate, and JSON Flatten along with a template. That gave us back the flattened data. The flattened data can be used by the report writer, and those fields show up now in the drag drop list of the report writer where they can be used to create a report. So I hope I didn't go through too much. I hope it didn't go too fast or too slow. But anyway, that is today's demo. So do we have any questions on how this was put together or any other comments? Go ahead and type them into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. And I'll give you a minute to do that. No, it doesn't seem like it. I'll give you guys one more minute for questions, and if not, we'll break. All right. That is it. That is it for questions. Well, thank you everyone for showing up. Thanks very much for writing in with that question so that we could do today's demo. If you're interested in getting hold of this PowerPoint or the sample script or any of that, just send off an email to tfservice@alphasoftware.com. I'll be happy to set you up. So thanks very much for everyone who attended, and we hope to see you next Tuesday at the next Transform Tuesday. Take care and have a great week. Bye-bye.